Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at some of the guns they're going to be selling in their upcoming February of 2018 regional auction. Today we're taking a look at a remarkably ugly and remarkably unusual Czech pistol. This is what's typically called a CZ38. The technical definition, or a technical designation, is VZ38, Vzor, or Model 38. And this is a pistol that was developed and adopted by the Czech, or the Czechoslovakian Army in 1938. It was developed at the CZ factory and actually formally adopted by the Army in June of 1938. They promptly placed an order for pistols with the factory, the CZ factory. They ordered 41,000 of them. The factory then set about, producing all of the tooling and setting up a production line to actually make the guns. They got the first 20 basically pre-production prototypes off the line, and the Army managed to get them tested 4 days before the Germans occupied Czechoslovakia. So at that point, this no longer really is a project up to the volition of the Czech Army. Instead, the German occupying army takes a look at this and decides, well, this seems to be a perfectly reasonable pistol, and, well, they could use some more arms anyway. And so the Germans have the CZ factory continue to produce this order. And they did, in fact, do so. And by December of 1939, all 41,000 of these pistols had been manufactured. They were basically taken over by the German army. They were used by the Wehrmacht. They were used by the Reich Labor Service. A small number of them were used by the Luftwaffe. In fact, the Luftwaffe had its own serial number range that they manufactured a little bit later. This was basically issued as a substitute standard pistol by the Germans. It was given the designation Pistole 39T. In German, Czechoslovakia starts with a T, and so all the Czech guns and tanks and everything had a little parentheses T indicating their nation of origin. And it served pretty well. It's actually a perfectly fine handgun, although it looks quite goofy, and it has this really kind of unusual disassembly sort of method, which, in fact, we will take a look at right now. A couple of the basic bits to go over on this. It is chambered for the 380 cartridge, aka 9mm Browning, or 9x17mm. That may seem a little bit unusual to us today, but that is the cartridge that the Czech military had been using in their previous pistol, the VZ24, and it was very well suited to a blowback action. And this is a blowback action, not a locked breech pistol, despite its relatively large size. So this is service pistol sized, but it has the simplicity of a blowback action, which, for a military service pistol, you're probably not going to be using it a whole lot. The difference between 380 and 9x19 in effectiveness probably doesn't really matter all that much, or at least the Czechs didn't think that it did. So it has a 9-round magazine, heel release right down there. The magazine is a little bit distinctive for having these long slots in it. Looks kind of like one of the Mauser 1914 pistol magazines, except longer. So that's the magazine. Factory name and marking is here on the left side, as is the serial number on both the slide and the frame. The serial numbers on these started at 250,000 and went up to 291,000. So 41,000 made, but they didn't start at 0. There is also a second series of these that were manufactured with a B-prefix serial number, and those are for export, we think, to Bulgaria. And then there was also a batch made for the Luftwaffe, a separate 3,000 gun batch that were serialized starting at 240,000 through 243,000. So at 270, basically 277,000, this is pretty much right in the middle of production, a standard, typical VZ38. And then on the right side of the frame, we have a couple other markings. There's that CZ letters in a circle, just a factory logo, and then E7, a Czech lion, and 39. And that marking will be the same on all of them. 39 is the year of production, and these were all made in 1939. And then E7 is the office that approved the pistols. So the factory where this was produced in, I believe, Strakonice, was technical office number 7. One other detail to point out, these Czech acceptance marks are the only acceptance marks you'll find on the guns. Despite the fact that they were actually manufactured for the Germans, they were not accepted by the Germans, probably because the Germans didn't have a waffenamt office set up by the time these pistols were ready to be manufactured, because they were basically starting to produce them as soon as the Germans came into the country. So they were accepted on behalf of the Germans by the Czech authorities. You will not find waffenamts on these guns, or at least not the standard ones. Occasionally one does turn up that apparently was manufactured by just assembling leftover spare parts at the end of the war. Those will not have Czech proofs. They do sometimes have waffenamts. They also don't have serial numbers, so those are fairly easy to spot. As far as operation goes, like I said, they are blowback, and they are double action only. So you can sort of manually cock the hammer here, but there is no notch to have it cocked. There is no single action mode on this gun. There was a very small number of single action / double action guns made. You can tell them from the outside because they will have knurling on the hammer to allow you to get a grip on it. But those are not the standard German occupation production guns like this. So it is, of course, DA only. There is no manual safety on it because it's double action. It has a long and heavy trigger pull and doesn't call for a manual safety. So it's a very simple gun to use. I mean, there's only one control, really, and that's the trigger. Now, there is also this guy. This is the disassembly catch, and it's pretty slick, and it's probably the most unusual feature of this pistol, other than its rather awkward appearance. And I should point out, this grip is really longer than it needs to be for this size of magazine, and to my hand it's actually a bit uncomfortably long, but that's how they opted to do it. So anyway, back to the disassembly. To disassemble it, pull this lever forward and then lift the slide up like this, and then the slide actually comes entirely off. The barrel pivots all the way around if you want to. That barrel is now easily accessible for cleaning. We can then take the grip screws out. I've already loosened that up, and then the grip is actually a single piece that wraps around the frame. So you can see the grip actually adds a substantial depth to the wraparound grips add a substantial depth to the handle itself. So they clearly intended for it to be this shape. Once we have the grip panel off, we can then slide off this little cover plate. This is similar to what you'll find on the VZ24. And then underneath we can see the firing mechanism. It's pretty simple because it is double action only. The trigger here is connected via pin to this long bar. That bar has a hook at the end, and there's a matching hook on the hammer. So when I pull this, it's going to pull the hammer around until that hook disconnects. Like so. It's a very simple fire control group there. The spring for the hammer is back here, screwed into the back of the frame. And then the main recoil spring is here in the bottom of the frame. So there's this round peg on the spring follower, which we can push, so that moves. That is held in that hole in the slide. So that's going to force the spring to compress when you fire. This lug is milled permanently into the frame and includes a little bit of rail there that keeps the slide in place. There's a second piece of little rail right here, and that's the disassembly catch. So pushing it forward slides it from back there out into this open section and allows the slide to lift up off the top. There is a spring-loaded firing pin. This piece right here is the firing pin retainer. So if I push the firing pin in, I can then lift that up and out of the way. That allows me to take out the firing pin retainer and our spring-loaded firing pin. Oh, and lastly, there is this little cutout in the side of the slide. That works in conjunction with this little bar. This is a very typical feature in handgun fire control mechanisms. If this is pushed down by the slide, it pushes this connecting bar down, which means that the trigger does nothing. That prevents you from unintentionally firing, or intentionally, firing the gun when the slide is not fully closed. It's only when the slide is closed that that notch lines up with that bar and allows the trigger to function. So this turned out to be a perfectly adequate and acceptable military sidearm for the Germans, and they used them through the war. Didn't end up putting more of them into production. CZ would do some other things later on. There was, like I said, an export contract made probably for Bulgaria, along with ZK383 machine guns by the CZ factory. Ultimately, 1,731 of these ended up getting sent to Finland as military aid, so there are some Finnish-marked ones out there. But this particular one is just a pretty nice example of the type. There's not a lot of variation. In fact, there's no variation in the guns themselves. So there's just one basic model, and that's what we have right here. If you're interested in having it yourself, it is, of course, coming up for sale at Rock Island. It is part of a batch with a couple other guns. If you take a look at the description text below, you'll find a link to Rock Island's catalog page on it, and you can take a look at their pictures and the other guns that come with it. And if you're so inclined, you can place a bid right through their online site, or, of course, by phone or live at the auction. Thanks for watching.